Some of you may know this, but of the two large-scale franchises that Bioware has made, Dragon Age and Mass Effect has historically been the more popular one, both in terms of its general reception, but also specifically in sales. And so, people are very invested in the future of Mass Effect. Unfortunately, the pathway to get to Mass Effect requires Dragon Age. And so you notice a lot of people out there, especially in light of all the things that have been going on with Dragon Age, quite worried for the future of Mass Effect, understandably, and quite invested in Dragon Age The Veilguard, specifically because they worry that if Dragon Age The Veilguard doesn't do well, that it effectively spells doom for the future of Mass Effect. And that is entirely true. Now, I thought I would give my own 2 cents on the Mass Effect franchise situation, as everyone is wont to do on YouTube. I'm no exception. And I have to say, rather unusually, I am more partial, at least historically, I've been more partial to Dragon Age as an IP compared to Mass Effect. I tend to prefer fantasy over science fiction, but that doesn't mean that I did not enjoy Mass Effect. Quite the contrary. At some point in time, it was some of my favorite games, the Mass Effect trilogy, that is. And I had a deep romance with Garrus, and I was a big fan of Liara as well. And so I have to say I enjoyed Mass Effect thoroughly. But over time, and as I've thought about it, I have made my peace with Mass Effect. I do not expect it to make some comeback. In fact, the nail in the coffin for me was Mass Effect Andromeda. As many of you know, Mass Effect Andromeda was a flop. There were many memes about people's faces being tired. The facial animations were abominable. And the only thing it did well was the combat. The combat was a step up. It was better than the previous games. But after the abysmal failure of Andromeda, they publicly came out and said, we're going to put this on ice. And so, although they tease once a year during N7 Day something related to Mass Effect, there is no evidence that Mass Effect 5 is really in the cards. And it's truly not an unreasonable concern if you think about how Dragon Age The Veilguard is going to do, to think about whether or not Mass Effect will be a thing in the future. Now, I've given my predictions and prognostications about Dragon Age The Veilguard. I could, however, be entirely wrong. Maybe it will sell like hotcakes. Maybe it will be incredibly successful, in which case, in all likelihood, EA will greenlight the production and development of Mass Effect 5, or whatever it's going to be called. But if Dragon Age does not do exceptionally well, if it only does average, or even significantly below average, I think EA will not be hesitant to basically take Bioware apart as a development studio, and that will be the end. And so, when I look back at Mass Effect, my feelings are something akin to some old relationship I had where it was very intense, I appreciated it, I have fond memories to some degree, but it lies in the past. It's no longer part of my present. And so I don't have this longing for Mass Effect that a lot of people do. I enjoyed it for what it was at the time. I played a boatload of the multiplayer on top of the single-player games. And it was a great time, and it was a great piece of art for its time. But as many of us are trying to come to grips with, it's just a fact that the current Bioware team is not the team of old. And the reality here is that, especially when it comes to Mass Effect, so many of the key people involved in that project have left. And so you are in a situation where, arguably, the manpower that would have gone into another Mass Effect title is even more lacking for a forthcoming Mass Effect title than it is for Dragon Age The Veilguard. When you think of some of the big heads that worked on the Mass Effect series, you think of people like Casey Hudson. Where's Casey Hudson? He has his own studio, basically, and they're working on their own sci-fi RPG. The studio is called Humanoid Studios, and we know next to nothing about the game they're working on. We don't know how they're getting their funding, who their publisher is, but suffice to say that Casey Hudson is no longer at Bioware, and he will have zero input in the next Mass Effect game if it comes into existence in the first place. And then you have the obvious elephant in the room, and I've been covering Exodus pretty extensively, James Olin and Chad Robertson, and they're obviously working on Exodus, Become the Traveler, which I've obviously talked about a lot on this channel, so go check out those videos if you haven't seen them. But Exodus is a science fiction game, and it is not Mass Effect. And then you have people like Drew Karpyshyn, who also has left Bioware, left it a long time ago. He was one of the lead writers for Mass Effect 1 and 2, and guess where he is? Also at Archetype Entertainment, he is the head writer for Exodus at the moment. So you see that some of the most important people that used to be active at Bioware working on Mass Effect are just not there anymore. Not all of them, there's some other people still there, I'm sure. But the reality is, as I said, that a studio is only as good as the people who are participating in the studio, who are making the games in the studio. At this point in time, Bioware appears to be, for the most part, simply a name. And the name is not backed up by the flesh that gave rise to titles such as the original Mass Effect games, Dragon Age Origins, Knights of the Old Republic, and the list goes on and on. They have moved on. They're either not involved in the gaming industry anymore, or they've moved on to their own studios and they're working on other projects. So, what does this tell us? It tells us that we need to be hyper-realistic about the future of Mass Effect. And as I said, I've made my peace. I'm not that invested in Mass Effect. In fact, I think, based on all the premises we have, that Exodus is shaping up, potentially at least, to be a lot more interesting in terms of the storytelling, the narrative, and on top of that, all the years of experience that went into making Mass Effect, and the learning process that these guys have gone through that will hopefully allow them to craft an incredible game. So, inasmuch as I have some investment in a futuristic, sci-fi action RPG space opera, it's probably in Exodus, and it's almost certainly not in Mass Effect. And we will know the truth in about a week, lords and ladies. In about a week, we will experience Dragon Age The Veilguard for whatever it truly is. As I said, you can ignore the reviews for the first month, but if you are going to buy the game, you can experience it on your own, and you can arrive at your own conclusions. I am deeply skeptical, as I've said many times, and if I had to predict an outcome, I think it will sell okay-ish or decently, but I don't think they're going to knock it out of the park. And that will probably lead to the consequence of EA not greenlighting Mass Effect 5 or whatever it's called. And ultimately, if I think about it, it might be for the best. I think on some level, sometimes things are what they are, and they're sort of a one-time event, something to be appreciated for what they were at the time of their emergence, which is how I view the Mass Effect series. It was a great space opera, I was invested in the characters, the ending left a lot to be desired, and there were some other issues I had with it, but overall it was quite the ride. But that doesn't mean that there can't be rides in the future that we can get on. And as I said, Exodus is looking promising. Of course, there's no guarantee there. It could turn out to be slop. It's possible. There's a non-zero chance of that. And even though we know next to nothing about Casey Hudson's project, his science fiction game, at Humanoid Studios, we do know he's working on a science fiction game, and how that game shapes up and what it turns out to be, only the gods know, but let's hope it's good at the very least. So, what I'm saying here basically is, yes, it's reasonable to be skeptical about the future of Mass Effect. It might not even exist as such. There might not be a future for Mass Effect. But we can take heart in the possibility and the likelihood that there will be other science fiction titles down the line that will possibly entrance us and charm us as much as Mass Effect did, and maybe even more. We just have to wait and see. Anyway, what are your guys' takes on Mass Effect and the future of the franchise? I'm always interested to see your comments in the comment section. And as always, if you like my videos and my takes, you can leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe. It's much appreciated, helps out the channel a lot. And I will check you out next time. Take care.